An easy way to solve the problems in Israel would be for Judaism and Islam to merge.
Yeah, wouldn't hold your breath.
Well, they both hate pigs.
True enough.
You could call it Jizlam.
I think you can go in circles, can't you? Trying to think of names for something, even a cat. Well, nettles cause 'em, dock leaves cure 'em. It's a sting. It's sting.
Sorry.
Never criticise Muslims. Only Christians. And Jews a little bit.
It's a humorous exchange, but it does prompt the question. Are there differences in the way that Christianity and Islam are treated in comedy? And more broadly, how is religion portrayed in comedy? Join me as I examine 4 television sitcoms and see how they represent religion on the small screen. The term sitcom is short for situational comedy, so a comedy show grounded in a particular location or circumstance, such as a hotel, an office, or the trenches of World War I. Mintz defines a sitcom as a half-hour series focused on episodes involving recurrent characters within the same premise. That is, each week we encounter the same people in essentially the same setting. So, if sitcoms tend to find the humour in everyday situations, then we can expect religion, an important part of many people's lives, to feature heavily. But, does it? Interestingly, little academic research has actually been done in the representation of religious characters in TV sitcoms. But a comprehensive study conducted by Scott H. Clark found that in the top-rating American comedies and dramas, just 5.8% of characters could be considered religious, while 77% of real-world people were religious. This could be for a number of reasons. Perhaps it simply doesn't make particularly interesting drama or comedy. Perhaps the makers of the TV show avoid religion in order to avoid controversy. But there are a few sitcoms which boldly go where few sitcoms dare to go. It's possible that whether a sitcom features religious characters or not is due at least in part to where it's set. 2 British sitcoms which focus on Christianity are set in a church: The Vicar of Dibley and Rev. The Vicar of Dibley centres on the Reverend Geraldine Granger, a female vicar assigned to the small church at Dibley. The church is largely made up of eccentric old men who are rather stupid. A lot of the humour comes from the audience laughing at their expense.
I've learned every single answer from last year's contest, so this year I can get them right.
And what about if the questions are different, Jim?
Oh, sod it.
In his study, Clark referenced 4 most frequent criticisms made of the portrayal of religious characters on television. 1. Religious devotion being portrayed as quaint and shallow. 2. Believers shown to be self-righteous hypocrites. 3. The majority of religious characters being clergy. 4. Muslim characters portrayed as villains. In The Vicar of Dibley, we get a lot of number 1. The 2 main characters in the sitcom who aren't portrayed as quaint and shallow are David Horton, who is rather snobbish and something of a self-righteous hypocrite, although he does change over time, and Geraldine, who is, of course, clergy. Geraldine is largely a positive character, and most of the time the humour surrounding her comes from jokes that she makes, rather than her stupidity. However, she is at times shown to be a bit of a hypocrite in not practicing what she preaches. While The Vicar of Dibley is set in the English countryside, the BBC sitcom Rev is set in an inner-city London church. Now, you might think this would mean we get a very different view of Christianity, but you'd be wrong.
You have an inner-city church with inner-city problems.
Despite aiming to be more realistic than The Vicar of Dibley, Rev likewise features a very small congregation, largely made up of eccentric characters, like drug addict Colin.
I almost feel like I'm surfing on a great wave of hope and love.
A bit like doing ecstasy then.
No.
And lay reader Nigel. The Reverend Adam Smallbone is shown to be largely incompetent and insecure in his role, and indeed his faith. Moderator of the Free Church of Scotland, Reverend David Robertson, has been critical of the television series, saying, "The BBC might like a pathetic, wimpy vicar who swears like a trooper and has the same values as the dominant elites and mobs of our culture. But I prefer a vicar of Christ, someone who will believe, teach, preach and practice the Word of God." The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has said that while the programme is funny, its portrayal of the church as struggling and dying is not true to life. One American sitcom features characters of various religious persuasions, and this comes up as a theme in a number of its episodes. The sitcom is NBC's Community, which centres around a study group in a place a little bit like this one. In Community, each of the main characters has a different religion. Shirley is Christian, Abed is Muslim, Annie is Jewish, Britta is atheist, Troy is a Jehovah's Witness, Jeff is agnostic, and Pierce belongs to a cult. Some of the show's humour comes from these different characters' religion and the way they interact with each other. And interestingly, all the different religions are the subjects of jokes at various times. Shirley, who is a Christian, is shown to be a flawed character with some real vices and a tendency to be judgmental at times. However, she does grow and develop as a character over time. In an interview, the actress who plays her, Yvette Nicole Brown, who is herself a Christian, said, "It's great that I'm playing a Christian with flaws because as every Christian knows, we are flawed. If we had everything together, there would be no need for Christ. It's great that I get to play someone who really mirrors a real Christian, and she's learning. She's not as judgmental as she was when the show began, and is more loving as a true Christian should be." The socially inept Abed is largely a positive Muslim character, something which is quite rare in television sitcoms. There are some jokes made at his expense, but the rest of the group are very accepting of his religion. While Muslim characters in sitcoms are pretty rare, the sitcom Little Mosque on the Prairie centres around a Muslim community in rural Canada. Some of the humour comes from the way in which the wider community is sceptical of the Muslims, assuming they have links to terrorism.
I'm the new imam. It's like a priest or a rabbi, only browner.
So are you denying that you're a terrorist?
But some of the humour also comes from the Muslim characters themselves and the way in which they live out their faith.
I will not eat cucumber sandwiches during Ramadan.
In writing about the show, one academic explains how the show's producer, herself a Muslim, intends the show as a medium to deal with the serious issues of terrorism, burqas and fatwas, in a manner that uses comedy to highlight the similarities between Muslim culture and mainstream Canadian culture. The fact that the show is created and acted by Muslims means that it presents an authentic portrayal of Islam life for many Canadians. The characters are not simply objects of ridicule, and yet they're not perfect. Instead, they are thoroughly three-dimensional characters. So it seems that perhaps the shows with the best or most realistic portrayals of religious characters are those made by people who are actually religious themselves. This is perhaps not surprising. It's quite a different thing to find the humour in your own religion than it is to make fun of someone else's. Through our quick look at this selection of sitcoms, we've seen there's often a tendency to portray the religious as quaint and somewhat naive, or else as religious hypocrites. However, sitcoms like Community and Little Mosque on the Prairie seem to be taking a rather more rounded approach to religion, showing religious characters not as perfect, but as real, genuine human beings.